I think that it's not that easy to answer why transgender women are at risk of HIV. The need to be accepted is so compelling in transgender women's life that a lot of times it is more important than their health. The risk of being rejected by family when they come out, risk of rejected by friends, risk of rejected by romantic partners, risk of losing employment, risk of losing housing. So there's a lot of things to be fearful about. Because transgender women, especially transgender women of color, often are economically disenfranchised. So it's conceivable that they might trade unprotected sex for favors. If a John says that they'll give you $100 extra if you don't use protection, and you have to put food on the table, what would your decision be? I have been HIV positive since 1993, and it was also the time when I first came out as trans. And of course, it didn't really go too well. So I had a few years where I didn't have my family by my side to support me. And I also lost my job. Back then, there's no protection. There's no California anti-discrimination laws, to protect people from being fired or terminated. One thing lead to another, mainly that I have to put food on the table, and I had to do like transactional sex work. That was the first time I actually got arrested and had to stay in a jail for a whole weekend. That's where the coercion happened. I was coerced by one of the inmates in my cell. I was afraid to say no. About 6 months later, I tested HIV positive. I waited a day before I picked up the phone to call my mom. At that point, when I first disclosed to my mom my HIV status, it feels like I had to make sure I don't upset her too much. It's kind of a mindfuck, honestly, that I had to think about my own mortality. And at the same time, I felt guilty of pissing my mom off. And I told my mom that I tested HIV positive. I apologized. And I told her that there's no cure. And the counselor told me that I might have 6 months to a year. That's not easy for a child to say to their parents. I don't care if you're trans or not. I think that was the only time in that 3 years that my mom and I talked about HIV. I think one thing I need to add to my story is that I have a great relationship with my family today. Eventually, family is going to show up for us if we allow them to. And it's not a bad thing at all, to have family back in our lives. A year after I was diagnosed, I was still alive. I had no idea why, but I was trying to make sure that it wouldn't be long. So I started doing even more drugs. And I think it was easy for me to go to that dark place when there didn't seem to be any hope in my life. I didn't have my family. I didn't have much friends. I don't think that I ever got out of the neighborhood to do anything else except walking to the corner stores to get groceries and then back home. It was an awful time in my life. And what happened next was I got attacked by two guys. They wanted to force me to do things against my will. I fought. One of them pulled a knife out and stabbed me. And that was the traumatic experience in my life that really got me to think HIV might not kill me, but my living condition might kill me first. And that's also when I decided to get into a treatment program and trying to get away from the neighborhood. I went into a treatment program. That's what happened next. And I spent 3 months in a residential facilities trying to learn how to have a life as a trans woman living with HIV. I was the only trans person. So it's easy for me to just say that, oh, like, this is not for me, I don't see myself. What I was thinking is that, I don't want the next person who comes into this room thinks that they're the only one in the room. So I want to make sure that I show up. And so that's why I did. So my so-called activism, for the most part, is actually a fight for my own life. I got myself a job, in the recovery services. For the first 3 years, I started working as a substance abuse counselor. I also was doing HIV test counseling on the side because I hated the way my test counselor disclosed my status to me. I want to make sure that I do it differently. Later on, I started doing case management for the homeless, and also started to do more policy work. Moved over to Transgender Law Center in 2005, and I've been on and off with Transgender Law Center since then, till now. For some miraculous reason, I think women tend to learn their own strength through this process of discovery. I did. I never knew how strong I could be until I actually have to live through an epidemic and survive the epidemic. It taught me to speak my mind. It taught me that if I don't stand up for myself, I can't expect anyone else to stand up for me. And that's probably motivate me enough for me to be really loud for all these years.